So we've talked about Biden's executive order. You've implied that obviously there needs to be more done. Is there anything that you've seen coming out of the Biden administration, perhaps his remarks to Congress last night, that imply to you that something is actually going to happen? I know that he's talked about universal background checks, sort of that like first floor of potential reform. Do you think that that's likely to happen soon?
I had a hard time hearing that last night. I mean, certainly we're in such a horrible moment, right? We've of course lost 600,000 people to a pandemic, and then as we start to go back in public, then there are more mass shootings, and we had over 40,000 gun deaths a year last year, and we set all records for gun sales. And so this is a massive problem, and one that's going to snowball. I mean, 10 years from now, people will be suffering the effects of what's been happening now. And so I support his call. I know his heart is in the right place. And I think that, he was imploring Congress. He was saying, I'm going to do something. And the suggestions that he was saying, like background checks, they're certainly important as beginner. It's kind of like the salt on the meal or something like that. But the unfortunate issue here is that most gun policy is set by the judiciary in this country. It's not really a result of Congress. I mean, it is to a sense, but really it's really judges set a lot of gun policy, particularly the Supreme Court. And there's a case pending now before the Supreme Court that threatens to overturn pretty much the modern gun control movement as we know it. And so there's a lot happening in this space going in both directions.
Well, that obviously very important. So tell me a little bit about that case and why you think it has the potential to be so big.
Yeah, well, at its core, New York City has had a law on the books since 1913. That's worked out pretty well, which is basically that people can get a gun license, they can do target practice, stuff like that. But you can't just carry a gun in public, conceal a weapon in public and go on the subway or to Madison Square Garden or to Central Park, because New York has basically balanced gun rights on one hand and public safety in dense urban areas on the other. And overall, it's been a pretty effective law if you look at the rates of gun injury and death in New York compared to other similar urban areres. And so part of the issue is there are two guys. This is, of course, they're being, the heads of something used by something. But there are two guys who said, well, we have, they had the right to go take target practice and take their guns back and forth, but they wanted to carry their guns in public because they needed them for self-defense, quote unquote. And this was appealed. It went all the way up. The Supreme Court for decades has not heard cases like this challenge, right? There have been one from Maryland, from other places. Basically, the idea is city and states' rights. Cities have a right to set gun policies that work best for them. But this Supreme Court, the one that now has three A+ rated justices from Trump, who are NRA rated justices, they decided to hear a case that had already been, determined earlier on to be not relevant and moot. They're going to hear this case, and an issue is: does the city of New York have a right to set gun policies for guns in public spaces, or does the Second Amendment create this sacrosanct thing where really it's almost like for some people the First Amendment, that just like free speech is true everywhere in the country, so should the Second Amendment be true, and they should be able to carry guns. And it's a potential disaster because it has implications not just for New York, but for other cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, et cetera, that have set gun policies and elected leaders who set those gun policies. Those policies are now at risk.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sort of, I think, gathering from what you said that you believe that now the Supreme Court is, I don't even know if conservative is the right word, but pro-gun enough that they might not only take this up, which they're going to, but decide that these regulations are not acceptable. And depending on how it's written, how broad the decision is, it could, in theory, invalidate virtually any restriction on people's ability to possess guns of whatever type, concealed, open. This is potentially, we don't know exactly how far they might end up going, right?
Right, I mean, they've signaled a narrowness, but I I think it's a cause for alarm because again, so many gun policy. I mean, basically what we've seen in this country is there was a 2008 decision called the Heller decision that basically said people can have guns in their homes, but locales can make up their own mind. Because shockingly, rural Montana and crowded D-train subway in New York are two different settings, believe it or not. And so maybe safety is not the same issue in those two issues. And so I think that's the issue. And so the Supreme Court kind of left this up to locales. And in that space emerged the modern gun control movement, basically this idea that we respect the Second Amendment, but it should vary. And so, a state like Virginia, for example, elected a governor who has a particular issue and things like that. Like we have a patchwork, right? And what we see is places that are very, very open about guns. Well, there's a lot of liberty if you care about carrying guns. And there's also much more gun-related injury and death pretty much across the board. And so, what we're doing is we're taking potentially the stuff from the places that have not that have more gun death. We're going to nationalize those policies. It's really alarming.
Certainly is. And so while in the near future, obviously we have to see what Joe Biden and Congress are going to do in this area. We should also keep a bit of attention on the Supreme Court as well, because that wasn't a case that was actually on my radar, but now I'm incredibly worried about it. So as always, Jonathan, thank you for terrifying me, but we do appreciate both your research and you joining us on the show. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.